A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. We'll start today's program off with tilawat of the Holy Quran. So I request Usama Awan Sahib to recite some verses of the Holy Quran for us.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قد أفلح المؤمنون الذين هم في صلاتهم خاشعون والذين هم عن اللغو معرضون والذين هم للزكاة فاعلون والذين هم لفروجهم حافظون إلا على أزواجهم أو ما ملكت أيمانهم فإنهم غير ملومين فمن ابتغى وراء ذلك فأولئك هم العادون والذين هم لأماناتهم وعهدهم راعون والذين هم على صلواتهم يحافظون أولئك هم الوارثون الذين يرثون الفردوس هم فيها خالدون. Translation. In the name of Allah, the Gracious, the Merciful. Successful indeed are the believers who are humble in their prayers and who shun all that which is vain, and who are prompt and regular in paying the zakat, and who guard their chastity, except from their wives or what their right hands possess, for then they are not blamed. But those who seek anything beyond that are the transgressors, and who are watchful over their trusts and their covenants, and who are strict in their observance of their prayers. These are the heirs who will inherit paradise. They will abide therein forever.
Jazakallah. So today's panel, we're joined by Aji Tariq from Maryland. We have Saud Iqbal from Virginia, and we have Osama Saifi from Los Angeles. And my name is Rizwan Khan. So today we're continuing the series on the ideal gentleman, and we're talking about how it is that we try to be better husbands, ideal husbands. And the point of subject we wanted to start it off today was conflict management, how we resolve conflicts in our marriage in better ways and more mature ways, trying to be a better husband, and then how we prevent conflicts. So I'll start us off with a story. One time I was staying at someone's house, and I was just in the bedroom I was staying in. I heard the husband and wife, they were having a pretty intense argument, and you can imagine how uncomfortable that is. So after the argument was over, I heard the husband come upstairs and start aggressively vacuuming the house. And I don't know why I was reading namaz at that time. I don't remember if I was already reading namaz or if I heard them start arguing, then I started reading namaz. But he came in the room and he started vacuuming around me as well. It was very distracting. But I was wondering why it was that he did that. Like, why did he start vacuuming? Maybe he was just dealing with stress. That's the way people deal with stress. They start cleaning after they get into an argument, after they're really troubled. Maybe he was just trying to do something noisy, so if the argument continued, he wouldn't be able to hear it. Maybe he was trying to avoid it. But I mean, one thing that I was thinking of is that maybe after you've been married for a long time, then you just know how it goes down. You know that, okay, we had a bad interaction just now, but we're going to fix this and it's going to be okay. And so maybe he thought that I'm just going to start doing a little gesture to kind of make peace and extend the olive branch, because right now we're not in a place where we can talk right now. We just, we need some space, but maybe I can start doing little things. So of course that was kind of a heated exchange. Alhamdulillah, in my marriage I don't ever have heated exchanges like that. But whenever there is kind of a disagreement, whenever sort of to an extent we've gotten mad at each other, then there is that question of, after the argument, after the disagreement, then you need a little bit of space. But then how do you extend the olive branch? How do you let the other person know with little micro expressions of love that that even though we need a little bit of space, but start doing the repair process and starting communication again. So that was the first kind of question, or the point that I had in my mind, that what are ways that we have of kind of reaching out to our spouse, different techniques or
Oh,
different ways. What comes to
yeah.
mind?
Yeah, and I feel like it's difficult because sometimes when you have those type of conflicts, we're both, even though in Islam we're taught to be a fabric for each other and we're two souls, we're kind of put together. At the end of the day, we're two separate individuals, and it's easy to have our egos come into play and to always want to be the one that's right, especially in a marriage. But I think that's just you have to remember the mindset that you're a team ultimately, and if one person's losing, then the other person's also losing. And I know
Yeah, exactly.
for many of us can agree that, you know,
That's
it's like
what I
our
was gonna
wives.
say.
Yeah.
Is that you know, I think through the process of a marriage, you know, you go through different phases. You know, in the beginning it is just you two, and the emotion is strong, the, you know, the kind of the people are not familiar with each other as much, so there is a bigger chance that, you know, arguments can be stretched out longer and then, you know, held in. But I mean, I think as long, well, the longer you're married, the more you guys need to have communication, and that kind of facilitates reconciliation quicker. So that, to answer your question, Rabbi, I think that kind of helps reach some way, you know, either a man or a woman to kind of reach out and kind of um, get that the forgiveness there, because you have to talk to each other throughout the day, especially if you have kids, and there's no way you guys can be angry and, you know, and not be able to function in the household without reconciliating and offering that olive branch.
Yeah. I mean, the point I have in my mind, or I guess the question I have in my mind, is that there's a reason why that first step is so important. And there's a reason why it's difficult as well, because there's a feeling of vulnerability there. When we had a disagreement, you know, either we thought our spouse was wrong, our wife was wrong, or we realized that we were wrong. And then it's not just about like reaching out to the other person. It's also, maybe it's kind of mixed with an apology. And there's a point of vulnerability where we're afraid that if I reach out, maybe it will be rejected. Or maybe, you know, my wife needs a little bit of space right now. Maybe I need some space because I'm feeling hurt. So I'm not at a point where I can just go up to her and say that I love you, I'm sorry, and, you know, let's work this out. Let's try to figure it out. I'll make these changes. But there needs to be, I mean, that's the reason why we need those little things before we're able to verbalize it. So in that phase of vulnerability, I mean, that's, I guess, that's a point that comes to my mind, that why is it that I feel so vulnerable, and then what do I do? Because I mean, when I think in my marriage, especially earlier in my marriage when I was a bit less mature, and, you know, I've learned it along the way, but one thing is just, you know, maybe just kind of having a little bit of some type of physical contact. You know, when you walk by her in the kitchen, just to like kind of do a little bump, a little nudge, or, you know, just as simple as making a cup of tea. I'm making a cup of tea for myself. I always make a cup of tea for my wife, but in that situation, to like make a cup of tea and then give it. So I mean, those seem like little things that help in that particular situation to remove that, to kind of gradually remove that awkwardness.
Yeah, I think like I also do the same thing. But I usually tell a joke, like a corny joke, and see what the reaction is. And if
And
it,
then you post
if,
on
you know,
Instagram
if I
afterwards.
get the reaction.
While the
But
other
yeah,
person's
so
making
I mean, for me, yeah. So I mean, like if the joke gets received well, then, you know, she starts giggling, and then, you know, that opens the door to kind of break the ice. But yeah, there's different ways to kind of gauge if that kind of conversation can be reciprocated or not.
Yeah, and there's definitely levels. I think in the beginning, it's like, you know, um, I think in the beginning, it's definitely like more little things, like nonverbal things. But then I guess like later on, it's like a lot easier to like, I don't know. It's like it doesn't feel as like awkward or like um, that vulnerability. It kind of, I think it kind of fades away. I think if you have like a working relationship, that feeling like fades away, and it's like easier to like be like, okay, you know, I know I was dead wrong, so how can I, you know, how can I get ahead of this? So, you know, whether it is like already getting coffee ready, you know, tea ready, you know, before they even come downstairs or whatever, like, you know, you start to
I think
think
that
ahead of the
requires
game.
that requires a mindset too. That requires
Yeah.
a mindset that you are willing to change, right? So if you're going to live your whole life just stubborn, being like, no, I'm right, and I have to kind of assert my rightness on this person, then it's never going to work, right? So yeah, I mean, I think both parties have to have that open mindset that, yeah, you have to accept your fault, or you have to forgive somebody else's fault, and then that can be the first step to kind of fix the situation. So, but if both people are stubborn in their ways, then I think it will take longer to kind of
Yeah.
uh, reach to that agreement.
And I feel like that's like super important, because ultimately, if you can't get over conflict resolution in marriage, then like those are the marriages that don't last, because it's just like that's kind of one of the main hurdles. How are you going to deal with an uncomfortable situation that comes up? And I know we mentioned kids, and some people say that, like, you know, if couples, I think there's this like misconstrued idea that if you have kids, that'll help you deal with conflict resolution, because now you have like something to work towards. But I think that just like makes things way more stressful. So I mean, things are already difficult, and then you throw in like a crying baby in the middle of that. Like that's not going to help you anybody out.
Yeah.
You have to like know how to deal with conflict resolution, how to like deal with uncomfortable situations before you start having kids or before you start doing this.
So while your baby's crying, how are you gonna how are you gonna fix this conflict right now? Your wife needs help.
Yeah, there's a couple of examples there. I mean, I guess like for me, like the examples I gave, you gave a couple of examples as well of like, telling a joke. That's kind of a risky one because I don't know. I mean, if the joke ends up just being completely rejected and it's not funny at all, then I don't know, everybody has a different way. But yeah, I feel like it's good to have those kind of low risk gestures of affection to start off with in that kind of a situation, because stubbornness is something that's in all of us. And especially when we're less mature, then there is that thing of a stubbornness or a kind of a standoff where, sometimes when two people are mad at each other, then they can go like a whole day without talking, just waiting for the other person to initiate. And, maybe sometimes it even for some people, it gets stretched out to a few extra days. So then having those things of like, having little micro gestures that are like low investment, but they are an expression of that kind of reconciliatory apology, that can help out a lot. So, I mean, I guess those are a couple of good examples: a joke, a cup of tea, maybe bumping in just a small bump or something like that. I mean, what other techniques are there? I need to know some techniques, some tricks, some low investment gestures of affection.
Getting a super soaker gun and just.
Yeah, I mean, those are like pretty general. I mean, I think you can't really go wrong with like food.
Food.
Like
just ask him where you want to go out to eat, and then you'll see that.
Yeah, I mean, like my wife like loves like pho, like that soup, that Vietnamese soup. So like if I knew I was dead wrong or I forgot to do something where that type of stuff happens all the time, where I get too busy with work and it's something that I consistently do, and then that 1 week or whatever it's coming up, and I'm like, I know that I'm dead wrong for this. I'll just go ahead and order that pho, man. Get that thing right.
What makes
the way to your wife's heart is through the stomach, right?
Yeah,
exactly.
So, I mean, that like there's so there's like really like good there's really interesting reasons why we feel that vulnerability in that point, though, because I mean, you can get an argument with somebody at work or anything else, and it's really easy to reconcile because you can kind of keep it only in your head. It's like a brain type of thing where like we disagreed on the issue, but then on everything else we're okay. But what makes marriage unique is how emotionally involved it is. And I think that, like, what you were saying, Ajay, of how after a while you don't feel that awkwardness anymore. It's like a maturity that's learned when a person is actively trying to be an ideal husband. But there is still a reason why it's there, like because if my wife got angry at me over something, usually it's because I was wrong about something. Usually it's about either selfishness or insensitivity. Like we men do that a lot. I do that a lot as well. Just being kind of insensitive, of not being aware of like, the little things, and then not doing certain things can be hurtful. And then just being selfish, thinking not about the other person, but thinking about myself. So then when I'm wrong about something, then it's not just about like reaching out of just expressing affection. It's also about like admitting that I was wrong, and then kind of making an intention that, okay, I'm going to try not to do that again, because it's not enough to just make a cup of tea or to just like tell a joke if I'm not going to do anything to try and better myself. So I think that's probably what carries a little bit of vulnerability there too, where it's like a feeling that, okay, I was mistaken. I kind of admit that. I kind of try to want to improve that, and I want to reach out to reconciliation at the same time.
Yeah, that's I agree. Like that's what I was going to say is that it's really important. Like you said, is when you're when you do resolve the conflict, you got to make a firm resolve that you're not going to do this thing again. So I mean that makes much easier in the future that you're avoiding this conflict in the future. So as long as you make a firm resolve that I will change and I will not do this because I know this is going to hurt the sentiments of my wife, then I think that you're kind of slowly closing that gap in things that can cause conflicts. So I agree with you what you said there.
Yeah, and I think it's important. I mean, I think what Rabbi Saab is getting the heart of it is that I think as couples we need to be able to sacrifice and overlook the mistakes that we make or our spouses may make. But I think it's also important to just be vulnerable and share what issues you might have in a way that's respectful and calm to the other person. So that way, if you do feel like you were if the other person was in the wrong, or you feel like your feelings were hurt, or whatever it might be, I think we need to be comfortable enough to share our feelings. And I know for me it's difficult, and I think for a lot of guys it's difficult to really talk about your feelings, about the times when you feel like, you were in the right, or you felt you were wrong for this reason, it's because of that reason, and whatever that might be, and just have that type of discussion with your wife, and do that in a way that still maintains the decency and the respect. And I think, having these conflicts are fine, because at the end of the day, like Mabisa was saying, we don't have these type of issues with our coworkers because we don't love our coworkers, right? The reason why we feel these conflicts is because even little things will bother us, because that's the type of, I think, a sign of a love for another person, that even small, disruptions in our frequency between that person can create this type of, anguish within us.
Yeah. Yeah. On that point, like of the one point that Saud is making about, how we have to improve ourselves, I was in my analysis, I don't know if you guys have the same analysis, but a lot of times there's conflicts. It's usually because it's an emotional relationship, and women are just more attuned emotionally. And I feel like sometimes more invested in the relationship, thinking about it, keeping like a finger on the pulse of the relationship and everything. So they're like a lot of times, and maybe I've seen like this, guys talk about it as well, how guys feel like they're always the one who's wrong. Like it's always because of a mistake we did, something we did wrong. So is that like a general experience? Because if it is, then like it's always about improving ourselves. Like, oh man, I messed up again. Oh, I did something wrong. Then now what do I do? So I mean, if that is kind of the experience, then it kind of comes into like, just trying to improve ourselves all the time. Or do you find it to be more of a two-way street?
No, I think what you're saying about men being wrong a lot. I mean, I can say for personal example, it's like definitely like the insensitivity of just like growing up around just brothers and like just men, like it's like you don't really like pay attention to certain things, and then you make those same mistakes, and then if you don't like actually set that resolve, like it's not gonna happen. So but the resolve, like you actually have to make sure you do it. And I think as time goes on, like you actually mean what you're like, all right, this is gonna be like fixed. Otherwise it's like, you know, it's like, oh, we're just a bunch of dudes, like it's all good, like, oh, whatever, no big deal. But like you're saying, like your wife is like invested, like, no, like it is a big deal, like this needs to be corrected. And in the beginning I would be like, it's all good, like it's no big deal. But then like you really see it and you're like, oh, this is a big deal, and then you got to work on it. I mean, simple and plain.
It reminds me of Marisa, but I remember, like, to answer your question, if it's a two-way street, I mean, like, that reminds me of a nikah ceremony Hazur gave once, where he was saying that, the men have good qualities and they have bad qualities alongside the woman. The woman also has good qualities and bad qualities. And those couples are the ones that thrive, are the ones that overlook the bad qualities and accentuate the good qualities. So, I mean, just by that statement alone, it kind of answers your questions, where, there are both sides have issues, and, the people that kind of resolve it better are the ones that overlook it, and then kind of discuss it and kind of work together to kind of come to a conclusion. So
my
definitely, I
experience,
think it's not just
my experience hasn't been that much of like an equal two-way street. Like I've actually like thought about it like a bunch of times, that like, do I actually have any real grievances against my wife? And like I actually can't find any, because like she's just always more sensitive and always more selfless in just about like every interaction.
No,
So
I think
it's
it
like,
is. I think you do, but you probably you don't express it, or, there always is always, like, I feel like as guys we're always kind of subduing it. Like, always, like as you're saying, like, it's okay, it's okay, it's okay. It's not a big deal. It's not a big deal. So I feel like even if you did have an issue, you would just be like, oh, it's not a big deal, and you kind of wouldn't take it to heart. But best, I don't know.
yeah, that's possible. I mean, I don't know. Yeah, I mean, that's true. I mean, the way I found it is that usually, and I feel like some other guys maybe go through this as well, where like, we have to improve ourselves. We have to be more sensitive. We have to be more selfless. And I remember there was a point where I kind of equated it with the relationship with Allah Almighty, like our religious, our namaz, because I sometimes can get into sort of like a negative like thought pattern. And so just take, for example, namaz. Like if I'm trying to improve my namaz, then it's very easy for me to like make it into a guilt trip, even though namaz is supposed to be a love affair with God Almighty. It's not supposed to be a guilt trip. So I remember at a certain point, I just made up my mind that, okay, I know I love Allah Ta'ala, but I'm not going to feel guilty anymore. I'm just going to try my best. And if I mess up, then I'll just keep pushing forward. So for example, if I slept through Fajr, I'm not going to feel all bad about it all day. I'm just going to, even when I make up Fajr later on, I'm going to try to concentrate in it and get the best out of it and keep trying to stay positive. And so I remember I made a decision in my marriage like that as well, that from now on, I'm not going to feel bad when I mess up, when I'm selfish, when I'm anything, because I know, I mean, I am a selfish and like insensitive person, but like I know that I love my wife. And so when I mess up, I'm not going to feel bad. I'm just going to keep trying to express love and doing better and doing good and just doing it out of a genuine, sincere expression of love. And I noticed that ever since I did that, then it was the same thing as my namazi. The namazi improved. It became like a namaz that was motivated from the heart with love and not a guilt trip. And also like, the relationship with my wife, it stopped from going in that direction of going into like a guilt trip or a negative thing, but turning into just an expression of love. But it had to come from like a core confidence, like a core decision that, okay, I'm going to stick to this. I'm going to have confidence in my love, and then I'm just going to act on it and believe in it. So it is a dangerous resolution. I can see some guys might make that resolution saying that, okay, I'm not going to feel bad about anything after this. And it
Yeah,
just
that's what I
takes
was
the whole
thinking.
marriage.
Yeah, you
that-
have to feel
I'm
bad
always
because if
right.
you don't feel bad, you're not going to change.
yeah.
So that's what I was thinking. Like, it's dangerous you did that, but it's good that it worked out for you.
It's a risk. It's like jumping head first and then into
But
the
I
ocean.
think
and
that's
hoping,
important to do in a
hoping you know
marriage
how to swim.
because, yeah, because I mean, you have like, I think the initial question is like, do you always feel bad if you're the one improving? But I think the thing is that you have two different people and they have two different mindsets and two different philosophies, and one may not be right or one may not be wrong. I mean, if you have a certain tendency or a certain style of like, I like to go to sleep early and wake up or early, and one person likes to sleep late and wake up late. Like, I mean, there's not necessarily something wrong with it as long as you're doing your fajr, right? I mean, it's just a different type of philosophy and way of living. And so it's just a matter of, I think one of the common words for marriage is to compromise and to come to that truth and come to that middle ground. But I think the tendency overall is that women in general are just much more selfless and much more thinking about, the family unit versus yourself. Because I can feel like for myself, I think I've done so many things where it's always selfish. And when I think about my wife, I'm like, she's always doing everything that's selfless. So if there's ever something that I can do that, err on the side of caution, just be to listen to her. But yeah, that might just be a
I think
tendency.
like Marissa, what you did was when you were talking about like, you made an active effort to kind of avoid conflict. I think I did something similar as well. Like me and my wife early on, we made it a, kind of a thing to never go to bed angry with each other. So, that was our way of kind of proactively kind of resolving these conflicts before they are, go out of control. Because, once we go to bed, we're going to talk it out, we're going to resolve it, and then we're going to wake up, happy. So, I mean, that's just what we do. And, I like the way that you did as well. And I'm glad that it worked out. So, I mean, I think everybody should have a kind of a mindset to how you're going to kind of resolve these conflicts before they happen. So that way, you're not stuck with this anger in your heart that you're just going to linger on for days and days, and no one's going
Some
to.
people try that. They might not go to sleep though. So I don't know.
That's what, but that's where the open minded comes in. Like you have to be willing to change. You have to be willing to accept your faults. She has to be willing to accept her faults, and then that's the only way you can move forward.
Yeah, that whole thing of working out before going to sleep, like that's something that works when you've learned maturity, or maybe if you just had you started off on the right step. But I think a lot of times people, they're not able to do it is because of those feelings of vulnerability. It's because there's like a huge obstacle, and like maybe you get used to it as you get over time. You get like, it's the same thing as like, when you tell somebody that you love them, then it gets easier to say it. But like in the beginning, it's hard. So in the same way, when you've had a conflict with somebody, then it's kind of hard to overcome that stubbornness, to overcome that feeling of wanting to win. But then over time it gets better. But I mean, I can definitely see how a lot of people would have a huge obstacle to like, to go to what if they both are still mad, both are still have hurt feelings, both are still feeling stubborn, don't want to compromise. So I mean, maybe talking it out works in some cases, but not in every case. Maybe sometimes people just need a bit more time.
Yeah, because not everybody's comfortable, like, expressing themselves and like being able to talk, especially like, I think someone said it earlier, like it all depends on what background you come back, you come from, what your family, how your family operated. Like, so if you're not comfortable talking it out, I mean, that may not work.
But I feel like if you're not comfortable talking like with your wife, then who are you ever going to be comfortable talking to? I mean, your wife is the most
It's,
intimate, you know
I
what I
think in
mean?
the
It's the most
beginning,
intimate relationship you can have.
yeah.
So if you're not willing to kind of talk to your wife and open up to your wife, then who are you going to open up to? So, I mean, I think at least with your wife, you should be able to have that openness
Yeah,
to,
theoretically, that's true, no doubt.
you
It's
know,
just that,
Yeah.
like, since it takes maturity to manage, so I think a lot of times earlier in the marriage, then we're not really good at navigating that emotional kind of plane, that area. And then when we make mistakes, and when couples make mistakes, then there's some emotional scarring that takes some time to overcome, that takes some time to heal. So I mean, if a couple can avoid misunderstandings, then yeah, everything is smooth. But then I think sometimes, like when there's unresolved issues, then it does take a little bit of time to overcome. So, I mean, in my marriage, I do
mm,
see that like there is maturity that came in me over the years. And in the beginning, there were mistakes, but I think like the main thing that helped was just really understanding what the mistake was, and then understanding why it was there, and then addressing it directly, so that then there's not like a lingering feeling of like touchiness on a subject. Because if I'm still feeling raw, if there's still an open wound, then the second that subject comes up again, I'm just going to react. I'm going to overreact. And I'm not going
mm.
to overreact because the issue is a big deal right now, but I'm actually overreacting over something that, came up like a year ago. So yeah, that emotional maturity maybe just comes over time.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like in the beginning, like, obviously theoretically you want to express to your wife all those type of things, but like in the beginning, especially if you get married young, you're just winging it, man. Like, I mean, at the end of the day. So you're just figuring it out. Like you make a mistake as a
You
man,
didn't get
then,
you didn't get the marriage handbook.
no, nobody handed me that thing. I mean, it must have been, it was rented out at the library when I went. So,
Okay, if chapter one is open your mind and communication.
Yeah, after years of experience, and this is like we're all young guys. I'm pretty sure if there's any like Nasser who's listening, is probably thinking, "Look at these bunch of kids. They like think they know what they're talking about." So I mean, like, yeah, having 5, 7 years of experience in marriage, but I mean, there's definitely a visible evolution that I can see there. And to a point you made earlier, Ajay, about how you get mature over time. I think one of the things that's helped me in getting kind of mature and dealing and preventing conflict, preventing it from happening even before it happens, is just to realize that feeling of being mutually angry at my wife, is the worst feeling in the world. It's horrible. And so that can't be taught. It's not, nothing is worth it. Because at first I remember, like, maybe when I would sometimes think that, okay, we just need some space. We just won't talk for like a day, and like, whatever, it's fine. But then after a while, I realized that even though that was hurting me, it was actually hurting my wife more. And that's another point on selfishness and selflessness. And then the focus shifted, because before, the only thing that was stopping me from acting like a child and being stubborn was that, okay, I don't want to feel bad, I can't take a day of us being mad at each other. But I think this shift for maturity that happened for me was when I stopped, when then the overriding factor was that I can't put my wife through a day of us being mad at each other, because that's selfish and that's more hurtful to her than it is to me. And so I have to make sure that I do everything I can to prevent it. And like, even if I feel like I'm wronged, or even if I feel like my feelings are hurt, just like, kind of man up and just take it and don't be a child about this. So that's something that's helped me to prevent conflict.
And I feel like when you have kids as well, that's like amplified, because the mother, your wife is also a mother, and they also need help, with kids in the house. So if you're just gonna ignore them and not help out, then that's, like you said, it's gonna make their lives harder and make their pain worse, because now they're not only are you mad at them, but you're not helping them with things that they need help with, which is making their job harder. So yeah, it only gets worse if you don't help, nip it in the butt in the beginning.
Mhm. And that's also, I think, a great way to like collaborate, I suppose, or just like gain those extra points that you may have lost by taking care of your own children. As silly as it is, but like at the end of the day, like I think kids can be like a big draining activity, and if you can help out with doing something that you hopefully intrinsically like to do, And that is just take care and play with your kids. It's something that would further bond with your wife as to like, okay, this is a person that is not only a good husband, but a good father to the children that we have.
Mm. So what is that specific thing that makes you want to do that though? Because I mean, there's the immature, newly married husband who, when a conflict arises, when his feelings get hurt, then he kind of inclines towards being stubborn, getting mad, making it into a conflict. But then there's a point of greater maturity where that same thing happens, it comes up, but there's something else that suppresses it and makes us sacrifice in that moment, not making us doing our wife a favor, but like, sacrifice our own feelings or whatever it is to then do the right thing in that moment. So what is it that we gain after 5 years or after 7 years through maturity, through gaining?
I think it's just over time you realize, when you're first newly married, you're really your own person. Your mama raised you. I was always a mama's boy, and you have that kind of attachment. And I think in the beginning you kind of see like, okay, I kind of have to like rein my wife in, or I have to be the one that'll like show her the way type of thing, or I have to listen to my parents. Over time you realize like you're a team, and there's a reason why 50% of your faith is completed when you're married, because that other 50% of your faith really comes from your wife. And you have to learn that now my obligation isn't so much to what I was before, like my family before, but now my obligation first is to my wife, and first to consider her considerations, her cares, her needs, because that's ultimately now my responsibility. I think over time, you slowly kind of lean towards that. You kind of lose maybe the other strings that were tying you down, friends, family, whatever it might be, your own personal ego. Yeah. And just come to the understanding that like now.
And if you think about it, you're going to be living with your wife, your whole life. So, I mean, when you're in the beginning, you don't realize that this is a whole life journey now. It might be like 25, 26 years old, and you probably have your whole life to go. So there's no point in holding on to your stubbornness when you have to live with this person for your whole life. So if you're just going to be stubborn and not, be able to resolve any of your issues or talk about your issues, your whole life is just going to be miserable, because now you're living with this person forever, and you're just going to be fighting for every little thing. So I think at that moment when you realize that this is much more bigger than just you two, but this is like a lifelong journey, then I think that's when I realized that you have to be able to extend that olive branch and kind of resolve these things. So
yes. So that like fear of misery, that feeling of that fear of misery is enough to when that frustration comes up, when anger comes up, because conflict is not a pretty thing, and feelings are not things that we can predict. The heart just, feels what it wants to. And so at that moment, when a person is suddenly out of his element and he's feeling frustrated, he's had a bad day, the anger comes up, then there has to be like a strong emotion. There has to be a strong something, a chord that a person then reaches into, where then, it just suppresses that feeling, and then, love prevails. So, I mean, is that fear of like the misery, is that like enough?
I think there's that saying, I don't want to butcher it, so I don't want to quote, I'm not going to quote it directly, but essentially where it's like, you want to tell the truth to the point where like, even if it's like going to embarrass you, and like it's just going to be, like if lying would just be easier, if you told the truth, that embarrassment, that feeling of embarrassment is so strong that I think that misery feeling is like almost as like strong as that feeling. So you don't want, it's like that. And it takes time, because in the beginning, like you said, it's a quick fuse, but over time it's like right when that moment comes, there's this killer instinct to say, no, I'm gonna put you back into this like cave. Just go back where you came from. And I mean, are you going to be perfect every time? No, man, that's not reality. Maybe you didn't have, you worked too hard or whatever. You had a long day, and then one day, you weren't able to grab him before he came out of the cave, and now somebody's sad. Like, so I think it's still a battle. Like, you still are going to have this go on and on, but that does exist where it's that embarrassment, misery thing that you're like, it's just like this revolving feelings that you're just like, it's like about to come out, and you gotta grab hold of it before it unleashes itself. So I don't know.
And you got to realize that when you're angry, you're basically setting yourself up for how you're gonna feel for the rest of the day or for the rest of the week or whatever. So once when that anger, like Ajiba is saying, is when it's about to come, you got to stop and think, be like, oh, what's going to happen when I let this anger out? Am I going to have a good day, or am I going to just ruin the rest of or ruin it? So if you're willing to have a crummy day, then that's you. But I mean, for me, I know that I don't want to ruin my day by getting upset on stuff that you shouldn't really be needing to be upset about. So I would rather have a happy day than a crummy day. So I don't know
It's
about
never
you
worth
guys.
it, man. It's never worth it because
Yeah,
that
it's never worth it.
feeling,
Yeah,
like
exactly.
that terrible feeling, like right when it comes out, you're it's, then you just
Yeah,
like
then you can't take your
become
words back. Once
you just
those words
become
come
this
out,
like
once you say the mean thing, you can't take it back. And now you don't know how that affected your life. So now
Then you do what that one guy did and just start vacuuming the house too. I think I like my interpretation of that memory, just because like it's so much more sweet. Like maybe he was doing it out of frustration, but when I think that like right after he got mad, immediately he started doing something that like he knows that his wife is going to be happy about, just as a small gesture. I don't know. It just makes me think that maybe this couple, they've been married for a long time. They know what they're doing, and they know how to fight, and they know how to reconcile. Like right when even when he's like really
I
super
have a
mad,
feeling that
blood
vacuuming
pressure
was
hasn't
for
come down.
the drowning out the sound of the yelling. I'm not sure. I don't think somebody's upset when they vacuuming because they're showing love. But
Yeah, that's probably true. Let me have my dreams though. Yeah.
so if I see a vacuum in the back, I see you. But you probably do the same thing.
You can see. Oh, okay. Yeah.
Investing in
So
the cordless ones for quick access,
yeah,
Just,
yeah,
That was crap of
not restrained.
yeah. So another point, I want we want to discuss is on Ghaze Basar, lowering our eyes, lowering our gaze, and that's something that's just a basic Islamic teaching. It's a commandment from Allah Ta'ala, and there's also not just an obligation that we have to Allah Almighty that motivates us to do it, but there's also just society. Nobody wants to be a creep. That creepy guy who's just staring at women. So, I mean, there's already intrinsic motivations and reasons like to lower our gaze, to practice modesty there. But the reason the Holy Quran is commanded is because it is still something that's there. It's a temptation. It's something that a person, finds themselves inclined to. And, all the society is pulling us towards it. When you go to the mall, there's huge posters up. You can't really avoid society's attempts to pull your eyes in to things that we shouldn't be looking at. So, how when we're trying to be an ideal husband, what is unique about after marriage in Ghazi Basr that was not really there before marriage? I mean, because there's a new dynamic and there's a new element to it. So what is something that changes there? I mean, when I think about this question, I think the main thing that comes to my mind is that there's an aspect of loyalty to it. Before marriage, it's an obligation to God. It's an obligation to society. You want to be a decent person. You don't want to be that creepy guy. It's kind of an obligation to your family, your mother and your sisters, that like, you want to respect other women the way you want them to be respected. So there's these obligations, but that feeling of disloyalty isn't really there with that strength. But then after you're married, if you make that mistake, if you're just like staring at women, if you're checking out women, and what if your wife were to see you, it wouldn't just be that she'd be disappointed in you like your sister or your mom, but she would actually maybe feel hurt. It would feel like a disloyalty. So that was one thing that came to my mind.
Yeah, no, I think again, like that feeling, man, like, what if like, it's not just us, like that we have to lower the gaze. Like, what if like it's a reverse and your wife, like, just like you're walking past the mall and like a lot of these gyms are like out of control now where they like promote, to get people to come to their gyms. And, theoretically, like the same can be said, like that disloyalty, like if you don't want your wife to feel like that, but if your wife looked at, whatever gym, like whatever, right? You don't want to feel that, right? Like, so I think like that disloyalty, that feeling, again, it's like that feeling that's so strong that you don't want to have to deal with that or experience that, because it's sad, man. Like it really, that is a sad thing to even think about.
Yeah, so I think what you said was correct. In the beginning, we were doing it for God, and I think if as guys, if at a young age, we are trained to kind of not look at the opposite gender like that, or not, stare or not talk or make friendships unnecessarily, then that kind of trains us to be an ideal husband, because now, we've come up our whole lives, saving ourselves for our wife. So now we're married. So now, all of our loyalty and all of our attention is for her only, because that's what we kind of are trained to do. But I think that starts at a young age, is that we should kind of teach our children, teach ourselves, our youth, that they shouldn't do these types of things. They shouldn't be looking at girls. They shouldn't be making unnecessary friendships. And then your marriage will be much more happier, because now you have that full loyalty. You'll have that full trust. Your wife doesn't have to worry about who you're talking to, or who you're texting, or who you're looking at, because you've established that, and they can see that you don't have these relationships. So it makes that bond much more strong.
Yeah, and I think Sal really brings up a good point there, because one of the most important things is having that trust with your wife and with a husband. Once that's broken, it's really hard to repair. It's not impossible, but it's just, you don't want to go up that battle. You don't want to be in that situation where now that level of trust, that loyalty has been disrupted. And I think that alone is a really good reminder for all of us.
And that feeling, Ajit, that you're mentioning of like, of that like kind of embarrassment, because I think, it has to start from a younger age. With our, wives, not just our wives, but I think our mothers and our sisters holding us accountable. Because when I think about myself, I feel like even before I was married, if I was out, then I would know that my sisters and my mother are watching my eyes. Like if something goes by that would attract a man's attention in that way, then there's like a little bit of a feeling of accountability there. And there is that feeling of embarrassment, of like disappointing, of just like, it's a different feeling. I remember one time when I was a teenager, I was watching a music video, and I don't know why, I just didn't register that I shouldn't be watching this. Like my mom was in the room, she came down into the room, and then she was on the phone, and she came and she put her hand in front of my eyes or in front of the screen. And she was like kind of laughing when she did it, but she was saying, "What are you doing?" And that feeling, I still remember, it was like being mortified. No, it wasn't, I was already doing something wrong. There should have been another feeling that, okay, I'm doing something that's wrong for me. It's an Islamic commandment. But there's also a feeling that, okay, there's a woman in my life who, when that person corrects you, then there's like, it's a different feeling to it. And I can't imagine, like, good Lord, if my wife did the same thing that my mom did to me that day, like, I don't know if I would ever be able to like sleep. There's sometimes I have some memories in my mind that are so awkward that like my fist, every time I remember it, my fists clench up and like my face just goes into this like retracted, I don't know. It's just, I don't know if you guys have those like memories, that super awkward memories where your whole body just clenches up just remembering it. That's a little, that's close to one of those though.
You have to share one of these stories. Oh.
But yeah, I mean, it's that feeling, man. I don't ever want to have that feeling, or like have your wife have that feeling where it's just like, and I think it definitely like, I don't have any sisters, but I have cousins that are females, and I have, my mother obviously. So I didn't never really felt like a pressure like that, like, oh, like my mom's like watching me. But I think just growing up in the society, yeah, we're trained, all like Sal was saying, like all, we're trained not to do this and do that, but it's not that easy. I mean, like it just frankly, like it's just so much pressure the way that this society is. And like, it's just now with like social media, like even if you do everything in your power to avoid it, they still throw it back in your face. And you're just like, you're fighting constantly to avoid that. And so when you translate that into your marriage, you really have to like focus and like, you just don't want that feeling. Like, and obviously when you build trust over time, like no one's gonna like, your wife is gonna be like, well, what are you doing over there? Like my wife always like, she has like it's just her running joke for the last like five years. It's like, were you texting your girlfriend? And I'm like, no, because you're sitting right next to me. But it's like that's just like an emotional maturity, like over the years, but it's just like that trust has to be built.
I think that's a good point, Ajay. Like I was just agreeing with you that I think we were probably the last generation that didn't grow up with social media, so we kind of got it a little bit easier, because we didn't have phones or computers in front of us all 24/7 that we're exposed to like these types of things, like you said. So I think this generation that's coming up, it's going to have it a little bit harder, if not, double hard, to be able to restrain themselves, because now everything is in front of you 24 hours a day at the tip of your fingertips. So
And they're
That's
like,
what scares me.
it's scary.
That's
Yeah,
the-
yeah, exactly. It's
yeah.
very scary. Like the generation coming up. I mean, I'm very worried. I mean, I have kids, I have boys, I'm worried about it every day, so,
yeah,
I
I
teach
wonder
them
how
what
that
my mom
I
used
wonder
to
how
teach
that
me. So,
affects like
I
a
think,
man, because I mean that thing where, like that little incident that happened, it just showed like their expectations. There's expectations that my mother has of me. And that just, just that feeling. There wasn't any need for guilt of scolding or anything. It was just like, it was just that feeling of self-respect and expectations and just having basic dignity. So, but I'm wondering that, what you're talking about is like, on social media, it's just so much out there and everything, that does there come a point where people just get comfortable, where like they're just watching stuff, like maybe they're just watching like Bollywood music videos with their mom and their sister, and like some of those types of things that are just almost like strip shows or something, and there's just no shame left, because if you
Yeah.
don't have any shame left there, then maybe you wouldn't really feel shame just watching that type of stuff in front of your wife on TV, watching it in front of your kids, and then when you go out to the mall, why wouldn't you just be staring at random women creeping everybody out, and then your wife would just not really, she wouldn't really think, or maybe you would expect your wife not to have a problem with it.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think that's 100% correct, because but it all depends on like how you're like, running your household, or how like, how you were brought up. Like I wasn't, we never, like I never grew up watching anything with Bollywood, and like it just was like, there's a lot of kids, a lot of relatives, or just people that I know who grew up with like Bollywood, like, either the songs or just them, their parents just coming from Pakistan, India, and just having that, like, that association of like, or that nostalgia where like they would still watch the movies here or whatever. But like they're those, all that stuff is like out of control now, like to the next level where it's
Yeah.
like, you're 100% right. It's like, it's just too
And
much.
it's getting
So,
worse. And it's getting worse because, like
Yeah.
I think in our first episode is what we were talking about, that these producers and these companies are making it worse and worse and worse to, grab your attention. So it's getting harder and harder and harder to avoid it. So, I mean, like I said, it's going to be a tough struggle for our generation to teach our young kids to avoid it, because like you said, it's getting so normalized that it's gonna take an extra effort on our part to kind of teach them that no, this is wrong and don't do this, because it's going to affect you down the line when you get married. So yeah, I mean,
Then how do you strike that balance? I guess, as with you and I both have two boys. You have three boys. I have two boys. In trying to, I guess, create a household that is modern in the sense that, like, I don't know, you're keeping up with the times, but you're also keeping up with your Islamic faith. I mean, I know that, I think, like you said, rightly, the four of us, we grew up at a time when technology was still up and coming. I didn't have a phone until like senior year of high school. And even that, it was like, I don't think iPhones were even out back then.
so
So
the
it wasn't-
Motorola Razor, that's what you had.
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, I had that one.
And like now it's like elementary school kids have like, I don't know, Apple Watches and like
Oh, yeah.
and like the iPhone and everything. And so it's like, what are you gonna do? How are you gonna like parent them 24/7 versus? And I think this reminds me of a story I've heard of Hazrat Jolly Zafullah Khan Sahib and Hazrat Qutb Masih Rabi about the TV at that time. The TV was up and coming, and I think Hazrat Jolly Zafullah Khan Sahib was saying that kids shouldn't have TV. We shouldn't allow this to be in the household. And Hazur was more like, this is part of society, so they should know what it is, and we should allow them to use it, but use it in a way that's, follows the teachings of Islam. And so I think that's kind of the philosophy that we should have, is that like we should allow our families or our children to like have access to these technologies, because there's going to be a time when we're not going to be their parents, in the sense that they're not going to be living in our house, and they're going to be out to college, and they're going to have their own decisions to make. How are they going to make those decisions on their own in a way that's going to be the right decision? And how do we give them those tools to kind of like make those right decisions? And so I think that's the really scary part, because it's easy to like not give my kid a phone, or like reprimand him if he's doing something wrong, and then like him going behind my back and doing it later on, or him going to college and doing it as he seems fit. And so,
I think it comes back to that thing of like, you know, when we're trying to be a good husband, and then we have that expectation of ourselves, and we expect our wife to have that expectation of us, that like my eyes should not wander. And like if I was raised by women and in a family where that expectation was of me, for me to have that much self-respect, then my wife, then I'll have that expectation, my wife will have that expectation of me as well. Then marriage, me trying to be a better husband, improves me in that area, where I now actually, you know, don't let my eyes wander, because I have so many things reinforcing it. It's like Allah Ta'ala, the Holy Quran. And then there's like mother, sister, then there's wife too, where there's that loyalty aspect. And I guess maybe like there where our wife helps us, where our wife's expectations of us help us to like, you know, not make that mistake. Then when our kids see it, then they'll never become numb to it. Because I feel like getting numb to it to a point where you're so shameless that you would just be watching that type of stuff in front of your sister or in front of your mother. At least, I mean, of course, it's not good to be a hypocrite, but there's shame has something. I mean, there's a difference between a person like watching it alone because they know that it's not right, but then just watching it openly in front of their mom and their sister. I mean, there's some value in the person being aware that they're doing something wrong. So I think maybe like, you know, trying to be a better husband, keeping that sense and keeping our eyes down appropriately out of a sense of self-respect and the expectations that my wife has of me, that maybe will hopefully help in raising my sons, and my sons will see that like this is what my mom expects of my dad, and they have like a happy relationship. So this is what I should expect in my marriage as well, and this is what my sister expects of me and my mom expects of me.
And I think we should have that level of trust, like Ajibay was saying, that, you know, like we should have that level of trust that all of our stuff can be like an open book. Like my wife can go through my phone, my wife can go through my computer, anything that I have, you know, so, you know, there's a trust. I mean, I have nothing to hide. I have nothing that's like, you know, there's nothing there. So, I mean, if you have that trust that you guys can, you know, openly just look at anything that what the other person is doing, then that helps build like that trust, like you were saying, that, you know, now you know that this person is not going to do, it's not going to be staring, not going to be talking, not going to be doing these type of things. So, and it's having that trust is a good way to kind of keep that level of integrity.
Okay. So there's one question here in the chat. I'm just going to throw it out there. So this is when your marriage first started. Was there that feeling that one fight might be the end of the world? You know, that fear, uncertainty, like now I messed up. And so, you know, what's going to happen? And I think that is something I was talking to my wife about actually earlier today. And that's something that I just never really felt personally, you know, like, but apparently like that is a feeling that maybe people have, that a lot of people have. I mean, what is your guys' experience with that?
What was the question?
The question is basically
One
like in the
fight?
beginning of the marriage, when you're still forming your relationship, then like, did you ever feel that like after an argument or after a fight that, okay, now like the whole relationship is ruined or something? Because maybe at the beginning of the relationship, things are more fragile. And
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I mean, I feel like that kind of, I don't know. I never thought it was gonna like be the end of it, but there was things that were like so big that I didn't know how to react to it. That was just because, you know, like you said, when you're first married, you don't know what can trigger the other person. So like, you know, I think I did something that kind of triggered my wife to the point where, I mean, I didn't know that this was would upset her so much. So you know, I did it, but it really upset her. So now that I realized that this really upset her, we kind of made a pact to never do that again and not bring that up. So yeah, there were instances where, you know, I felt that it was a big deal, but it was just because, like you said, you know, we were just so new that we didn't know what was, you know, more hurtful than something else. So.
I think definitely though, but I think like having that fear that this gentleman, whoever's asking this question, is important, because then that also pushes you to be like an ideal husband. Because if you are caring about whatever conflict to the point where you don't want it to become something so big, then that's very important to identify too, and to analyze that's how you're feeling about this certain situation. But personally, like I think like there was instances where you do, for me, like I did have to stop and look at it and be like, well, this is something that I like Saad was saying, that I didn't realize is triggering, or is like some issue that to me, again, man, it's not a big deal, but like this is bothering my wife, and like I just keep brushing it off. And like if I don't come up with a resolution or like a solid plan of action, it could then become something bigger. So then that slowly becomes something that you have to be mature about. But identifying that this could be something, I think that's important.
Mhm.
I think mindset's important too, just in the fact that you know that, we're Ahmadi Muslims. When we get married, it's for the long haul, and we do our best to keep our prayer for that. I mean, we grew up in an American society where being married is like, I don't know, girlfriend, boyfriend plus. It's not, doesn't seem to hold the same type of semblance of like that strict compact that you have. So I think, I mean, maybe yeah, you should have that fear in the sense that like you know that you can always be lost if your conduct isn't right. But I don't think that like if you do something wrong or if the other person does something wrong, that's like a reason to call it off. I think at the end of the day, it's like you have to go through every single avenue to before you come to that point. Just because your mentality should be that like this is going to be your life partner for the
Yeah,
rest of your life.
I think maybe one of the reasons why I never really felt that is because I was just like so just so like committed from even the point of the like engagement, because I put in my situation, I put a lot of emphasis on the istikhara, and then once I had said yes, I just thought that okay, that's it. There's no way that I can take even one step back from this. And I would actually think, because I mentioned before that sometimes I just think about the worst possible situation. So then I would think of it in kind of like those stories. Like I would sometimes imagine that okay, what if my wife or my fiance got like burned, like what if her face got burned, something horrible happened. But then I would think like, would I still go through with the marriage? And then like the answer that would come from me is that yeah, no matter what happens, now that I've said yes, this is going to happen and I'm going to like fulfill the commitment. So I think it might have had to do with the istikhara and that sort of thing as well. But like that feeling of loyalty and love, or even loyalty and infatuation, I just felt like it was so valuable. I even remember there was one place as a Muslim, it said that like, when someone would ask me what makes me emotional most, even in my youth, he said that it's stories of loyalty, stories where people are just loyal and love, where they go down, they'll make any sacrifice. So that sentiment, I remember like in the engagement space, it was very strong. And it was kind of because of that sort of very like fatalistic negative thinking that I sometimes have, where I think what is the worst that could happen and then how am I going to deal with it? So maybe like just having those kind of thoughts a lot during the initial process,
Mhm.
that just kind of made me really cemented in that like no, nothing is going to break it from my end, inshallah. And then
Mhm.
also from the other end, like I've always felt, I feel like this is kind of a, like it can come off as an insult, but I've always felt that my wife loves me more than I love her. But it's not because I don't love her, it's just that like her capacity for love is more, or I don't know what it is, but like
You're
yeah, I've
like
never
you're young.
felt that. Yeah, like I've never I never felt that I never felt that it could like break at any point. But
Yeah,
I
I
don't know,
feel like
maybe.
yeah. I mean, I think if there is, I mean, I think to answer his question, I think if there is an issue that you feel that will blow up to the point where your marriage can break, you should discuss that before you say yes. Like remember something like do your istikhara, ask your questions, tell everything about yourself that that might be a roadblock. And then if both parties are cool, then I mean, nothing. I'd like, someone was saying like nothing should be able to break that after you say yes, because now you've said everything that you've had to say and everything about yourself, and everything about her. So there's nothing that should be able to be so bad that it will be the end of it, because you're willing to take everything at that point.
Yeah. All right. So we've reached the end of our time. So Jazakallah for those who participated, and Jazakallah for you guys for taking part in the discussion. So inshallah, we're continuing this pilot project for one more episode next week. So now that we've come to the end of our session, I'll ask Muhtaram Talim Azim Akram Sahib to close us out, please.
Jazakallah, so does everybody. I can't show myself right now, but just wanted to thank everybody for their participation. Inshallah, we have one last episode happening at the end of this month. Please tune in and invite your friends. Jazakallah. Imam Sahib, Murabi Sahib, if you can lead us in a silent prayer, please.
Okay. Please join in silent prayer. Ameen.
Assalamu alaikum.